How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is how to hand trap. Now, where to hand trap has been a couple videos that I've already made so far, but it doesn't really go into the matters of when your hand traps become offensive rather than defensive, and it doesn't really dip into the situations where you're like, well, what do I do when I can't respond to my opponent anymore? What cards do I look for? And how do I respond to an ever-changing game state? These are a lot of things that I would like to answer for you today. Also, when do you hold your hand traps and when do you use them as part of your combo, i.e. using them to discard as cost, normal summoning them into big plays, and when should you just try to go for the more control board and then just use your hand traps as defensive? There's a lot of different things that you can do with hand traps, and a lot of people don't really look at them as more than just negates, but they really can play a clutch role in your games and help you win. So I hope that this can kind of shine a new light on them, as it kind of gets overlooked, and there's a lot of different ways that you can really use hand traps in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So to kind of start things off here, I really want to talk about what do you do when you can't respond to your opponent anymore. I'm talking about multi-roll, Lost World, Meltdown, any cards that are like this, right? We see Meltdown hit the board and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this Bell and this Ash really don't do a whole lot. But what if I told you that they really could still be an impact in that game? So to start things off, I want to talk about Ogre, because this is going to be one of those cards where I keep telling you over and over that this card is going to be absolutely bonkers this format, and it is. And I actually have quite a few slides that I'll show you in a little bit, just why I think this card will be that good. So the first situation here is when you're playing against Sky Striker and they have multi-roll live, and then all of a sudden you're like, man, I can't respond to them, like, what do I do? Well, multi-roll has a loophole, and you can't respond to the activations, but you can respond to the effects of spell cards. So when they use a multi-roll in the end phase, you can go ahead and ogre that. They lose a lot of very valuable resources, and another thing is that if they want their multi-roll back in the following turn, they're going to have to burn a Kagari to get it back, which is really important because multi-roll is their grind game. So they have to choose between getting it engaged back or the multi-roll, and that can lead to a very lesser side of card advantage, which can really make Striker fall out very fast because they really need that card advantage to keep moving forward. So this is another thing where you shouldn't panic if you can't respond to them, because there's always instances where if you do live the turn, that you can really shut them down in response with another hand trap in a different scenario. The next thing I want to talk about is Bell. So take my last video, for example, where I talked about the Shaddoll Dogmatika Invoke deck, where if you get under a Meltdown, there's other cards that can be really impactful to hit. So if they do summon the Op Clone, no, you cannot respond to the Op Clone on summon, nor the monsters used for its material. But what you can do is that when they link off the Op Clone for maybe like a Cross Sheep, if they go into like a Gravity Controller, it attempts to add a Shaddoll card from the deck or grave to the hand, so you can go ahead and Bell this effect. Very impactful because it's another way for them to get to their Schism. So it is very, very nice for you to go ahead and use the Bell there, and it can be very impactful as well. The other thing is that you can always use the Bell on the Knight of your Servant or an Ash if you did have the Ash, which is also very impactful because it shuts off one of their engines. So this is another thing that I would very much so be looking forward to if you do find yourself under a Meltdown. Another thing that you can really find Bell being offensive for you is if you are trying to combo, you can go ahead and look for the call by to use the Bell on. If you are aware that they are playing that card, this is another very good opportunity to use your hand trap as something different than just a negate, because it can help you progress your game state this way. So these are just a couple things that I wanted to mention when it comes to no response windows. Where do you really want to use these cards? In future videos, I can talk about other ones in these scenarios, but I just felt like these would be the most impactful as of right now, because I feel like Ogre and Bell are still the most impactful hand traps that we have currently. Now, the next thing I wanted to touch on was Shifter. I get a lot of questions about Dimension Shifter, and I really wanted to make this quick note in here, but you always want to activate Dimension Shifter in the draw phase. Now, I will tell you why, and that's because there's two cards that you should be afraid of whenever you activate Dimension Shifter. One would be Gamma. Gamma is always going to be very scary, especially playing against Dragon. They can do a lot with the Gamma, going straight into like a Chaotic Ruler, what have you. The other thing you should be very afraid of is if you do hold the D-Shifter into the main phase and then you wait for a key partner combo and they have tactics, that can be even more scary. Because where Dimension Shifter would shut them off for a turn, they can go ahead and rip the tactics and then rip a very key card out of your own hand. So at that point, you're going to be starting with 4 cards in your turn, and maybe you won't see the most optimal hand. Speaking about decks like Flunder that will be running Dimension Shifter, where you need a bird and a field spell, it can be very detrimental if they rip your Robina or your Eaglin, let alone a field spell. So very much so be aware of this and always activate Dimension Shifter in the draw phase. It is just the best time to do it because because you don't want to get tactic. Gamma is way less scarier than a tactic. I just really would hate to see somebody lose to a triple tactics talents because they used Dimension Shifter elsewhere. Please always use this in the draw phase. But there's another card that I want to talk about timing with that's a little bit more important, and that's Nibiru. Now, Nibiru is very much so an interesting card and when you want to drop it because it has so many different versatile times that you can, and it always changes versus every deck. So decks like Hero and decks like Salad, they don't have any negates that they can actually put up. They just don't really have any of those cards that they can use to their disposal. Maybe we'll see some integration when we start seeing like the Brave Engine in December, but for now they have no real way of putting up a negate. So these two decks alone, you'll always just drop Nibiru whenever they attempt to end their turn. So whatever their last main phase is, you'll go ahead and just reveal Nibiru. So like no matter what they're doing, like let them full combo. Salad, the Hero deck, just let them do every single card that they want to do. Let them drop it all on their board. Then just end of their main phase, just go Nibiru. There's nothing scary that they can actually put up or meaningful, so Nibiru can always just be waiting to the end of their turn. Now, this isn't true with every deck. So we have decks like Tri-Brigade and decks like PK, especially Tri-Brigade now with Bird Up, which can be very scary. You should be dropping Nibiru whenever you feel like they're threatening a negate. What I mean by that is if you ever see like Rugal hit the board, like a Link 3, or any real opportunity for them to go into something like an Apollousa, you should be dropping a Nibiru on them then, especially if you see a Link 3 though. If you see 2 Link 2s hit the board, I also would recommend just throwing Nibiru at a combo deck, because these are things where they will be attempting to put up a Apollousa or some kind of negation. So you do want to be on top of when you drop this, because unless it's very free and obvious like the Salad deck or the Hero deck, where they can't really do anything to you, so Nibiru is always live, decks like Phantom Knight and Tri-Brigade, they will have the opportunity to put up a negation, especially the new version of Bird Up is going into the Utopic Future Draco, I believe it's called. So that's a very, very important choke point there, is when you start seeing like F-Zero being put onto a monster, that's when you want to just drop Nibiru because you know the negation is coming. So, just wanted to mention these real fast because I do get a lot of questions on these, but I wanted to make that very clear. If you are playing against something that threatens a negate, drop it before the negate. Decks like Salad, decks like Hero, feel free to drop it right at the end of their turn. They won't put up an actual negate. So I want to talk about Ogre for a second, because I keep bringing it up and I don't really get a chance to go into why I think this card is going to be very good, just in general. But I have a couple examples for you. So Ghost Ogre is really cool because it adds spot removal to decks that can't really break boards. And what I mean by breaking boards, it doesn't mean like breaking through 6 negations. It just means like spot removal, basically. So like even if it's like Chuche Shen, right? When they go to use Chuche, you can go ahead and chain Ogre and like pop the Chuche, which is really important because that's another Chuche gone for them. And they have to like recycle it back, right? So they can actually keep using it. So it's going to be lesser of a problem. And these are spot removal cards that we don't really get to see, as a lot of the hand traps besides Ogre don't really do any kind of spot removal. That's what makes Ogre so unique, and it really gives it the opportunity to make you deal with less things on your opponent's boards that things like Ash wouldn't really take care of, right? So what I mean by Ogre being really broken, though, is that this is one of the most offensive cards that we have, because if you were unaware, Ogre can actually use its effect from the field as well. You don't have to just use Ogre from the hand. So in this moment, we can actually use E-Telly against like Tri-Brigade. When you're playing like Phantom Knight, for example, they play double E-Telly. You can summon Ogre to the board, and then when you're doing your standard plays, if they go ahead and activate that Apollousa, you can chain the Ogre, and then since the Apollousa is once per chain, the Ogre will then kill the Apollousa, since it did not have a chance to lose any attack, and the Apollousa will not negate what it was trying to negate. This is why I think Ogre is really insane. The ability to be used off of the board itself and then be able to be tutored out by a card like E-Telly and be used offensively rather than just as like a negate. Yes, Ogre is not a negate, but it's still one of those things where it's a very unique situation with this card that really can come in clutch for you as far as spot removal goes. So that's why I really enjoy it. The other thing is that if you are playing Striker, and this is a very, very good interaction for all of my Striker players that watch me, I appreciate each and every one of you. The deck is a very big learning curve. Let me show you my biggest trick when I'm playing Ogre that it helps you beat people who play things like IO. So make the most of your situation. Let's say your only cards in hand are Ogre and Area Zero. Something you may not know is that if you activate Area Zero, it will be negated. But if you normal the Ogre, okay, even though the effect is negated, you can still activate Area Zero because all the IO does is negate the effects. So if you activate Area Zero and target the Ogre, you can then activate the Ogre and pop the Area Zero summoning ray. This is very, very important, especially when you can go for a very good poke damage when they're already getting burned for 700 off the IO. It's a very good way for you to get raided the board. Then if you have like a Rose from hand that you can summon, now you can go Anaconda into DPE and pop the IO, which is really nice as well. So there's a lot of very cool interactions that you can do with that, or just go into a Phoenix if you play that. So just having these little interactions, especially with cards like Ogre, just make it so versatile and so good in the format currently that I just wouldn't not play it. Like Ogre is just such a fantastic card right now, and this is another key example of how you can make your hand traps to become offensive rather than defensive. So what do you just do when you have one hand trap, right? You are looking at the one hand trap in your hand, you're playing against like this crazy combo deck, and you're like, man, what is this one hand trap going to do for me? So when you have cards like Bell, you see Transco Talker here, because this is a really important interaction. If you just have Bell and you're playing against like Salad, the easiest way for you not to die and to use a Bell to the biggest advantage of your own is to Bell things like the Transco Talker, trying to bring back the Update Jammer, because then you won't auto die to an access code. You'll take a lot of damage, but you won't auto die to it. And this is why I really enjoy Bell, is because it has such a high impact to just not allow your opponent to like spam Reborn from the graveyard, and you can stop one of the key points so they can't actually put up the biggest monster that they want to and really go for game. So having Bell in my hand always makes it feel very safe, especially when you have against like Dragon, when they're trying to go for like the quad Boral play and you can drop Ghost Bell. This is another way that you can really save yourself a turn and really be able to come back stronger in the follow-up. So it doesn't always mean that you should panic when you're ever playing against like a crazy combo deck when you just have one hand trap. It just means that you need to look for the most opportune time for it. So I have a couple examples here too. When you just have Ash. So Ash is a card that I would define as hitting the power card in a deck. Most of the power cards in a deck are the cards that search, or the cards that pseudo search. So like the Chaotic Ruler, when it gets to 5 cards, dumps a lot in the graveyard. When you have Miscellaneousaurus, even though you can't do anything to their dinosaurs during their main phase 1, you can still Ash the effect of Miscellaneousaurus in the graveyard when they banish it for cost and attempt to summon the Armageddon, which is very impactful, and that's the #1 time that you want to use Ash against the Dino matchup. Also ashing things like the Purple Nightfall, very, very important because it's the #1 searcher in the deck. So when you just have an Ash, it just means that you should be saving it for the #1 searcher that they have in their deck. And even Miscellaneous summoning the Armageddon, I still consider that like a searcher because it's their power card they're trying to get to. They're trying to blow up a baby in their hand. So it's a very, very important interaction that you have. So this is another thing where like if you just open one of them, you shouldn't panic. Again, if the game state seems really grim, you're under a Miscellaneous, you can't really do a whole lot. You can't like Ash their Oviraptor, and if they go Oviraptor effect, you probably shouldn't Ash that because it's just bait for the Miscellaneous, right? So like you want to wait for them to activate Miscellaneous because they're going to try to go Ovi, add baby, and they'll go Miscellaneous, try to summon the Armageddon, and then you'll Ash that, and a lot of times they'll pass unless they have the additional extender, which is just another very good reason to be running Ash. But if you just have this, just know that this is only for power cards. The other thing is if you have like Imperm or Veiler, Imperm's a little different because you can save it for your turn, and you hit cards like Shen Shen, and at that point you're allowed to play the game again, which is very, very good. But if you have like a Veiler, I would just wait for like the power cards as well, because these are the things that happen on board, obviously. Whereas the Ash is just like all the searchers. This would be specifically just for the cards that you see on board that are very terrifying, or just wait for them like Verte Anaconda. The Y-Strix, again, against like the Raid Raptor decks, if you hit this card, they kind of just pass. And then the Imperm is always going to be for like the Shen Shen, or cards that you save. So basically you want to save the Imperm for your turn as much as possible. Unless you're playing against like Tribe and you can get like free negations off of that. But decks like Virtual World, I always feel the safest when I save the Imperm, because you just don't get locked underneath such a heavy effect. That it really helps you out in the long run, and holding the Imperm can actually help you combo in that matter. So that's why I really like them as more of like a progression of game state, versus being preventative to your opponent. Because progressing your own game state by negating their card and then comboing is way better than just like getting like a weird negate in their turn that like might stop them, and then you still have to deal with like a Shen Shen, right? So sometimes I'll just hold that as much as possible, even though it's kind of hard sometimes, but like going 1-for-1 trading with a negation is always the best. So Meister is another one that I want to talk about here, because Meister is really important. I feel like this card's very underused and underrated in the format right now. Things like hitting the Titan Clad so they can't get the effect of Summon or Search. Hitting the Abster Router early is very nice as well, because I always Meister the Hieratic Seal, but if you're just waiting for a first turn hit with a Meister, the Abster Router is always very nice. Or the Seer in PK, whenever they're trying to bring back Cherubini, going ahead and Meister that, because they can't get to an Apollousa, and that's one very big thing that you don't have to worry about, especially for playing combo, because decks like Dragon play Meister right now, so Apollousa isn't a fun thing to play against, right? So like if you can stop the early Seer, it doesn't allow them to have a free Link 2 on board, and it would be a very easy Apollousa for them if you don't do this otherwise. So that's why I really feel like this is another thing that, even though it is preventative, I feel like it's almost a progression of your own game state, because it's another card that you just don't have to play through, right? But there is something that I do want to mention. There's a very common combo coming up very, very soon in a lot of tournaments with Scythe. And this is something where you need Meister or Bell to stop it. Imperm works too, but these two are going to be very, very clutch. And I'll talk about why. So they're going to have Hulk and Dagda. So like any combo deck that can't combo, or like they get shut down very early, can do this combo. So whenever they activate anything on their board, they're going to go ahead and set Scythe. And then on your turn, they're going to use Hulk. Hulk is going to summon TG Wonder Magician. Wonder is going to try to target the Scythe. This is where you can Imperm this. So you can either Imperm this now, or you can wait till Meister or Bell the Scythe later. So if you don't have Imperm for this, right, they're going to go ahead and target the Scythe. They're going to blow up the Scythe. And while the Scythe is in the graveyard, you can Bell or Meister the Scythe. And this is very important. And you want to do this, because otherwise it's going to be a very bad time. So if you Bell or Meister the Scythe, then they won't get any of this. But if they get the Scythe back on board, you're going to be locked out of your extra deck. And then they're going to use Wonder Magician's effect to Synchro Summon. And then they're going to make Baron. So not only are you locked out of your own extra deck, you are now under a negation that's an Omni. And then on the follow-up, they can actually use this if you don't, or if they don't kill you on the next turn. On the next turn, when they go back to your turn, they can use this in the standby phase and Reborn Scythe. So it's very scary that this is a combo in the game now. Just know that it does have counters, like hard counters, and that's going ahead and Meistering or Belling the Scythe, or going ahead and hitting the Wonder Magician with an Imperm. Both very impactful. Just make sure that you are ready for that, because this combo is going to be very common. It's very, very good, though. It's very cheap to do in a deck, because it's only 2 monsters. If you really go into like your Dagda, and then you can go in like your Hulk, or what we see a lot is that if you can't get the Dagda effect off, then you'll go into Hulk, and then like you'll go into your Dagda, because whatever you summon off the Hulk, if you have another monster, you can go right into Dagda, and then when you banish Hulk for cost on your opponent's turn, it'll trigger the Dagda. So it's a very, very cool combo. And again, it's just another really cheap option, especially like in the game, money-wise. It's very cheap to pick all this up, and it can really stun your opponent. So just keep an eye out for this, because this is a very cool combo coming up right now. So when do you discard or normal a hand trap to combo, or like when you're really trying to push for game? So you really have to be careful about this, right? Because like if you have a game against like VW, right? For example, let me show you. And you're playing against where they have the Dragoon on the board. They just use like Muddy Mud Dragon, and you're playing Striker. And now you're looking at like the loaded graveyard. They have a Dragoon, but they also have like maybe like a GG on the board, right? And they have like a Lulu in hand. And you're sitting here like, okay, So like imagine that we have like another monster on board, and so you can go like access code, you can swing over the Dragoon, and they can pop the GG, and then you can go ahead and hold the Ash for the Lulu. But let's say they have a couple cards in hand right now, right? And you're not too sure that this access code is going to be able to be safe from like a Veiler. So you're like, all right, they have like 3 cards in hand. I know one's a Lulu. If I get rid of this Ash right now, then it's going to be a problem if they can combo back, because the Lulu's going to have Lao Lao, and then it's going to be kind of a bad time. I could see this going very south. But then you're like, I'm playing Striker and I have a really hard time with Dragoon, so Underworld Goddess would be a very good option right now. So you could normal the Ash, you could suck up the Dragoon, make Underworld Goddess, and then beat into the GG. And then the Veiler doesn't seem so scary because it doesn't really do that much to the Goddess. So at that point, you're just like, okay, I have some options here, but I get rid of the Ash, so if he has anything to normal summon, he can use the Lulu effect. So there's a couple things that you really have to think about, but the number one rule that you have to think about here is if you can't kill, hold the resources. So like even if you just go like a simple play, like let's say they don't have Dragoon, right? They have like Chuche and like the GG, and you already baited like the Chuche. If you have like a couple cards in hand, you can consider just going like Unicorn, pitch a card, spin like the Chuche, attack over the GG, and then hold the Ash. So there's always different scenarios you have to think about whenever you're trying to determine the best way to crack a board, because I see a lot of people when they're comboing, even with like Dragon, right? And they go to discard, they discard like their Ash, and they're like, all right, all gas, we don't need hand traps. And then they get stopped, and then they don't have the hand trap to like prevent their opponent from making a big board, right? So this is a number one thing that you really have to think about when it comes to hand trapping is, okay, if I hand trap them now, especially on their turn, am I going to get hit by tactics? Or like, especially with Dragoon when it can go up in health, like does that like really mess up anything I'm trying to do? There's a lot of things that you really have to think about when it comes to hand trapping. So just kind of keep this in mind, as you shouldn't always consider the hand traps to be the first thing to go. Maybe you pitch another combo piece and go for a safer combo and hold your resources so that you have better follow up with your opponent if they do just top deck the nuts, right? So you don't just absolutely lose to that, which I've seen happen multiple times, and it's always unfortunate. But this is still something that you really should think about. So another thing too that I really want to bring up to you is, if you really want to know my number one way of really being able to go into my deck and realize that I have bricking issues and how do I fix those bricking issues, well, you can kind of shuffle up your deck on here, right? And especially on EDO Pro, which is where the screenshot's from. And then you can look at each pile of 5 and just see if each hand is playable, right? So this hand right here, Engage, Ray, very playable. Fusion Destiny's hand's insane. The next one, we have Fusion Destiny Rose and a Pot of Prosperity that can get me into any of these cards. Very, very broken as well. We're looking at our next 5, and then we see that this hand has Ray, very playable, Ray playable, Ray playable. Then we have this one where we get a little bit interesting because we don't have as many playable cards. We're always banishing throughout Prosperity, so we're going to be seeing the Tactics, the Widow Anchor, the Ash. This is going to be a very unfortunate hand, but one bad hand so far really isn't that bad. And then we're going to be seeing our last hand here where we see Hornet Drone, Fusion Destiny, which is cracked. We have the Area Zero that we can hit with the Ogre if need be. This hand is very broken. So 1 out of 8 bad hands really isn't bad, right? That's really good. So this is a good way that you can really shuffle up your deck and keep shuffling it and keep seeing if your hands are coming consistent or not, and if they need any tweaking. If you start seeing one card in particular that's really breaking your hands, maybe you should try pulling that card out, putting another card in, and seeing if that helps out your consistency at all. Let me know what happens, and let me know if that helps you at all. This is just a really good way for me when I go to deck build to really figure out if my build can be consistent or not. So last but not least, guys, I want to remind you my 5K subscriber special is coming up on the 13th. Very, very important for everyone to be able to sign up that wants to play. We still have plenty of spots open, so feel free to come in and join. For first place, we have a Box of Bows. Second and third, we have 2 Megatons each. And then for fourth place, we have the 3 Cyber Style Structure decks. And it's really cool because you get the Imperms, and also the Cyber deck alone is very, very fun and can just outright kill your opponent turn 2 very, very easily, as we've seen this deck do for many, many years so far. So I do hope that you are excited for this, as it is going to be a very fun tournament, and I see a lot of very cool lists signing up already. So if you are interested, the event will be held on DB November 13th. The entry will be $5. We're going to go ahead and cap it off at 150 players. I'm only at like 20, 25 right now, so definitely feel free to sign up. Only a couple days before the 13th, so make sure that you get in to the Discord. You DM me your deck list, and then I will send you my PayPal, and then you can go ahead and send the entry, which again is reminded right here, is that when you send me your deck list, I will send you my PayPal, and then you can then send me the entry, and then I'll record your deck list and your name in the Google Doc, and you'll be all set to go for November 13th, 10 a.m. EST. So I do hope that everyone had a great time in the video and learning how you can really use your hand traps in a different light. They don't always have to be defensive, and they don't always have to be preventative. Sometimes they can really help you out on the offensive side of things, and that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. So I hope that if you are new here, you will like, comment, and subscribe. We are pushing for that 6K, which is right around the corner, and I'm really hoping that we can push for it by the new year, 10K. Just very big goals and very big ambitions, because, you know, we are a growing community, and I just want to help out as many people as I can. So the bigger the audience, the more people I can teach. Field centers are in production right now, and it's very exciting as well. I do want to mention that they are being made currently. I'm looking at a couple designs, and once I start getting some good designs and I start seeing where I want to go with it, I will let you guys know where I'm at in the process, and we'll go on to how we will go about selling those out to you guys. So I hope that everyone had a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys all in the next video. Thank you all so much.